Next thing we're going to go into is solving by taking the square root. So first thing we want to do is isolate the x squared. So it could be x squared or in parentheses, whatever that is, x minus 2 to the second power. So we want to isolate it. Once we isolate, we're going to take the square root. Remember, the square root has a positive and negative root. So if I took the square root of 4, it'd be plus 4 minus 4. So I come through here. I simplify, so I want to get this x squared by itself, so I add the 5. And then I'd have 4x squared equals 7. I divide by 4, and so I get x squared equals 7 over 4. And then what it says, take the square root. Now if I look at that, taking the square root, that means we're taking the square root of 7 and the square root of 4. So what is the square root of 7? You can't take the square root of 7. So we're going to say plus or minus the square root of 7 over the square root of 4 is 2. We're putting plus or minus here because it's both positive and negative. Come to the next one. We want to isolate. We want to get that by itself. So we add 8. Add 8. 2x squared equals 8. Divide by 2. X squared equals 4. And then we take the square root of that. What's the square root of 4? What times itself gives you 4? That'd be 2. So we'd say, you could say plus or minus 2, or what this means is 2 or negative 2 is your answer. Come to the next one. As you go through it, we want to isolate. So we add 7. So 3x squared equals 9. Then we divide by 3. So x squared equals 3. And then take the square root. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 3. So again, if you can't take the square root, we're just going to leave it in what we call radical form with the square root. If we come here, we subtract 12, and we get 5x squared equals negative 10. We divide by 5. X squared equals negative 2. And then we take the square root of that. We can't take the square root of a negative number, so we can write here, no real number solution. In Algebra 2, you actually learn what's called imaginary number. So no real number solution for it. So anytime I take the square root of a negative number, that's when we're going to have it. Here, we come, and actually I'm going to move this up so we have a little room to work with it. So when we look at it, we're going to go ahead and isolate. Just like I said, always isolate what has the exponent. So that means we're going to divide by 3. Divide by 3, so x minus 5 squared equals 6. Then we take the square root of that. And so we have x minus 5 equals, again, I can't take the square root of 6, that doesn't give me a whole number solution. So we're just going to leave it as plus or minus the square root of 6. And then to solve, we would add 5. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 6 plus 5. If you took the square root of 6, you'd be looking at probably 2.4. So if it said round or estimate, but right now we're just leaving it in radical form. We come here, this is all isolated, that's by itself, so now we're going to take the square root. The square root of 36, so that would be x plus 5 equals the square root of 6 is 6. Or, so we'd say plus or minus 6. So we'd say x plus 5 could equal 6, or x plus 5 would equal negative 6. So when you go ahead and solve, you get x is equal to 1, or we subtract 6, x equals negative 11. So your answers. Last one, we want to isolate again, subtract or divide by the 4. So the square root of x plus 10 equals 6, and then we take the square root from there. So the square root of 6 doesn't give me a whole number, so it would be x plus 10 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. and then we subtract 10. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6 minus 10. So just pay attention. It's if they say leave it in radical form, if it doesn't come out, then we just leave it there. Other times you could take the square root and we'd write it plus or minus. So it'd be positive 6 or negative 6 as you work through it.